as you will note, remotely using the Zoom application. I'd like to make a few comments for the benefit of our witness and members as well. Please wait until I recognize you by name before speaking. For those participating by video conference, click on the microphone icon to activate your mic, and please mute yourself when you are not speaking. Interpretation for those on Zoom is at the bottom of your screen, and you have a choice of either floor, English, or French. For those in the room, you can use the earpiece and select the desired channel. A reminder that all comments should be addressed through the chair. In accordance with our routine motion, I am informing the committee that all witnesses have completed the required connection tests in advance of our meeting today. Now, pursuant to Standing Order 1082 and the motions adopted by the committee on Friday, July 15th, 2022, and on Wednesday, September 21st, 2022, the committee resumes its study of the export of Russian Gazprom turbines. And it's now my pleasure to welcome from the Canadian Gas Association, in the person of Mr. Timothy Egan, President and Chief Executive Officer. Mr. Egan, you will be provided 5 minutes for your remarks, after which we will invite the members to ask you questions. When you're 30 seconds away from your 5 minutes, I will raise this as a heads up, so you're fully aware of that. The same applies when members are asking you questions. There's a certain allotted time, so when you're getting very close to it, I will raise this, and kindly try your best to wind things down with your response. So, Mr. Egan, the floor is yours for 5 minutes.
Merci, Monsieur le Président, et bon après-midi à tous.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and good afternoon to everyone. My name is Timothy Egan. I am the President and Chief Executive Officer of the Canadian Gas Association. I'll be doing this quickly today. I have 5 minutes.
CJ is the voice of Canada's natural gas delivery industry, and our members are responsible for nearly 40% of our country's energy needs, which is almost twice that of the electricity industry. We serve 8 provinces and 1 territory, and since before Confederation, Canadians have been using gas energy, and over 20 million benefit from it today, and more want it still. Canada is home to world-class companies in natural gas production, transmission, and distribution, and ours is some of the lowest emission gas energy in the world. Gas is the largest single contributor to our residential, commercial, and industrial energy needs in the country. And ask users, and they'll tell you a key reason why. It's because they feel secure with our service. The affordability of our offering, the reliability of our delivery, and the environmental performance of our sector all contribute to this sense of security. What's more, we're working constantly to serve changing energy needs. So many are calling for energy with lower GHG emissions, and our member companies have been meeting the demand with new innovative end-use technologies, new emission management systems, or new fuels like hydrogen and renewable natural gas. The scale of these efforts is worth noting, Mr. Chair. In British Columbia alone, the RNG currently being produced is equal to the energy potential of the Site C Dam, which is a 1,000-megawatt hydroelectric project. But all that RNG in British Columbia is being delivered over existing utility infrastructure without the need for new infrastructure. Now, your hearings are in the international situation, and our focus at CGA is domestic, but the two are related. The well-being of our country turns on the security of gas energy delivery. So we understand the energy security threat that Europe is currently facing. We've been very active in the discussion on it and on Canada's potential role in supporting our allies. Russia's invasion of Ukraine has fundamentally changed natural gas energy geopolitics. Russia was meeting roughly 40% of Europe's gas needs, and that supply is of a scale comparable to what Canada produces annually. In other words, a doubling of Canadian production would be required if Canada were to replace Europe's Russian supply. Now, this would be an extraordinary feat, but it is actually technically possible. We have hundreds of years of supply, some of the best infrastructure in the world, and the expertise to expand that infrastructure. Now, Europeans know this, and their diplomatic missions have been meeting with Canadian industry on it. CGA has met with a majority of EU members' missions here in Ottawa and with the EU's diplomatic office itself. Canadian producers have been flowing more natural gas to U.S. markets, which has then been liquefied and sent to Europe. This amount could increase in the near term, but system capacity constraints pose barriers to it rising significantly without major infrastructure expansions. However, it is the medium and the long term where Canada could help much more, and Europe wants that help. While we're modest LNG exporters now, we're set to change that with the LNG Canada project, which will produce 13 million tonnes per annum in its first 2 trains, and the site is designed to allow the addition of 2 more. What more should we do? Well, first, Canadian industry should work with government to map out a strategy to move more energy offshore. Canadian companies are standing by, prepared to discuss the opportunity, and we know that government has been in touch with various players to date. Second, we need clear signals that government is prepared to support more gas energy exports. We note that Minister Freeland has been forthright on the topic, and we draw members' attention to her remarks at the Brookings Institute in October in Washington, where she said, I quote, "The EU set a powerful example when European vaccine makers honored their contracts with non-European allies. Canada must and will show similar generosity in fast-tracking, for example, the energy and mining projects our allies need to heat their homes and to manufacture electric vehicles. And crucially, we must then be prepared to spend some domestic political capital in the name of economic security for our democratic partners," end quote. So we need specific action. This is my third request. And Minister Freeland, in her call for fast tracking, is absolutely correct. We need to streamline our regulatory framework to enable rapid project development and to foster investment confidence that we're serious about delivering. With a low-emission product and unrivaled expertise in moving it to customers and some of the highest standards of corporate and environmental performance, Canada should be working to ensure the companies in our industry, from wellhead to burner tip, are helping the world. If we do this, we'll have the credibility to lead the global conversation on opportunities like RNG and hydrogen and other fuels and technologies as they emerge. Now, a final note, Canada will be hosting 2 important international conferences over the next 2 years. The International LNG Conference in Vancouver next July and the International Gas Research Conference in May 2024 in Banff. These events present platforms for Canada to showcase our leadership. The fact that we're hosting them points to the reality that Canada has a significant role to play in a dramatically shifting and unstable global energy marketplace. Canada's gas industry has brought and continues to bring energy security to our country, and we can and should help bring it to our allies in the world at large. The German Chancellor said it best when I spoke to him when he was here in August. In his words, "Mr. Egan, we need your gas." Let's work to find ways to help address that need. Thank you kindly for allowing me to appear before you today.
Thank you very much, Mr. Egan. We will now open it up to questions by the members. Our first member is MP Chung.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mr. Egan, for coming to our committee. Can you elaborate on what Chancellor Scholz said to you when you met with him last August when he came to Canada?
Yeah, this was during the Chancellor's visit in August, and this was at a meeting he had with industry and public sector representatives in Toronto. He and the Prime Minister were both in attendance. They both made some remarks, and then there was a break afterwards, and I had a chance in the break to talk to the Chancellor. It's not very often you get a chance to buttonhole the G7 leaders, so I took advantage of the opportunity to do so. I thanked him for his remarks, and I noted that his remarks were particularly friendly towards Canadian gas. And he said, these are sensitive subjects. And then straight up he said, "Mr. Egan, we need your gas." And I said, well, Chancellor Scholz, I encourage you to say that as much as you can publicly. Now, I wasn't even going to repeat that he had said it, except he then said it on CBC News. So I felt it was fair for me to make reference to the remarks. But I think the Chancellor and his representatives here in Germany have been forthright, as have many of their European colleagues, and again, we've met with a majority of them. We've met with I can provide the committee a list if they're interested. But the Europeans have been amazed to learn the gas story in Canada, because frankly, even though we know it well, it's not advertised that well, and they've been quite overwhelmed by it. And their response is, "All right, what do we do to build a relationship?"
Well, thank you for that information. I think it's clear that Chancellor Scholz came away empty-handed. He didn't get the gas he was looking for. Subsequent to his visit to Canada, Germany signed contracts to get gas from Qatar, which is unfortunate for Canada. During the visit, Mr. Trudeau said that there has never been a strong business case for natural gas projects in Eastern Canada. You said, however, that there is an incredible business case if the regulatory framework is clear. Who's right about the business case?
So I don't remember the precise words the Prime Minister used, but insofar as we need a good business case, he's correct. We do need a good business case for any gas project in the country. My point is that the business case is determined by a variety of factors, one of which is the regulatory framework. And so I pick up on the Deputy Prime Minister's remarks about fast-tracking it. Because if you can create a tighter regulatory framework, investors are going to be much more interested in the opportunity to invest in projects here in Canada and develop projects in Canada.
On the Deputy Prime Minister's speech at the Brookings Institute on October 11th, I believe it was, where she indicated that Canada wanted to fast-track energy projects to heat people's homes, by which I interpreted that to mean natural gas projects. Have you seen any changes from the government in terms of expediting projects for the export of LNG? Have there been any discussions with the government about this, or was this simply stopped at that speech she gave in Washington on October the 11th?
There have certainly been discussions. I know that many of my member companies and others in the industry have been in conversation with various government representatives, and I think it's fair to say that the government has moved significantly from its positioning early in the calendar year to how it talks about LNG projects now. I think early in the year, dare I say, the government itself was not convinced of the opportunity, and I think they're much more so. I think in addition to Minister Freeland, Minister Wilkinson has been making positive statements, as has Minister Champagne.
I agree with you. I think there's been a 180-degree turn by the government on LNG projects. I think they've realized their mistake, and at least they're talking the talk about exporting LNG for our allies in Europe. My last question to you is, just after the war began on February 24th, with Russia invading Ukraine for a second time, Germany announced about a week or so later the construction of 2 new LNG terminals in the Baltic Sea. They have since expanded that to 5 new projects in the Baltic Sea. Some of those projects are expected to be fully operational this winter. In other words, they were able to go from 0 to 100 to completion in less than 12 months. Why can't we do that?
Well, I think Germany has, like Canada, an exceptional environmental regulatory framework. I think in the face of what is really an incredible crisis in Germany, they've looked at that framework and they've said, we've got to speed it up dramatically. Canada needs to do the same thing.
We are the 5th largest natural gas producers in the world. We sit on some of the largest reserves of natural gas in the world. We have the engineering expertise. We have the private sector capital. We have the private sector companies like Enbridge and TransCanada Pipelines and other major energy companies based in Canada. And it's just astounding to me that in an emergency context where the very security and defense of the NATO alliance is at risk because of Russia's brutal attack on Ukraine, that we aren't able as a country to do what other allies have done, such as Germany, and expedite the construction of these plants that are so necessary to displace Russian gas in Europe, cutting off the funding for Putin's war machine. And so maybe you could just comment on that, why there doesn't seem to be a sense of urgency here on part of the government to get these projects done.
I think it's incumbent on us in industry to make clear just how significant the opportunity is for Canada. I think we've all been somewhat complacent because, let's face it, energy is abundant and very affordable in this country, and we are suddenly seeing the shock involved for societies when prices rise dramatically and supplies are constrained. So I think it's changing the conversation in Canada, and I just hope it changes it more quickly.
I have no further questions, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chong. We now go to Ms. Ben Dayan.
Merci,
You
Monsieur.
have 6 minutes, Ms. Ben Dayan.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Merci beaucoup.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mr. Egan, for being here with us today. I understand and I appreciate your point of view. It's your job to come here and call for the extraction of fossil fuels. I would note that there is a complex study that the committee has the Committee of Natural Resources has done on this very matter. But given the fact that you're here with us today, I have a couple of questions as to the importance of our commitments when it comes to environment and climate change. You won't be surprised that as a member for Quebec, our commitments when it comes to being carbon neutral is very important to me and to the many Quebecers that I represent. There is Canadian legislation today that is aiming at that very act. A bill on carbon neutrality. As you said in the introduction, in your introductory statement, our allies in Europe are in a critical situation right now. It's a very challenging situation when it comes to energy in general and natural gas specifically. I'd like to hear your views on that commitment and that Canadian legislation that we have and what you're proposing when it comes to increasing production of gas and liquefied natural gas in Canada. Is that compatible?
Je pense que c'est possible. Alors,
I think it's possible. I prefer to reply in English if that's fine.
well, first off, I should clarify that actually our association is not focused on the extraction of fuels. Our association is focused on the delivery of fuels. And so our member companies are delivering gas energy right across the country. And overwhelmingly right now it's natural gas, but increasingly it's RNG, as it is increasingly in Quebec. And hydrogen, of course, is an emerging opportunity. So really the fundamental point here about what we do is that delivering gas energy is an enormous economic benefit and an enormous security benefit, and it's a benefit that the Europeans recognize. But to your specific point about how do you reconcile a country like Canada, which is a natural resource producing and exporting country, increasing its exports in the face of targets we've set. Look, I think the government has created an enormous challenge for itself with its emissions cap. I would say, however, that when you look at the performance record of Canadian companies across the value chain and you compare them to their global allies, we perform extraordinarily well. Our standards are as good or better than virtually everyone else in the world. Now, if you think of Europe receiving resources from a place like Russia, where the standards are much, much lower, where emissions are much, much higher, and you reflect on it in a global context, then you see that Canada could be contributing to lowering global emissions in a profound way. And are we making the perfect the enemy of the good by setting standards internally that prevent us from delivering much better benefits to the globe at large?
Merci pour cette réponse.
Thank you for your answer. You mentioned on a few occasions already the option of exporting gas. Do you think it is realistic to export gas from the east coast of Canada?
So I think that comes back to the Prime Minister's question about a business case. I think that every project deserves to be evaluated on its merits. The biggest advantage of East Coast gas exports is that the transport distance is dramatically less. The biggest disadvantage is that you don't have the same supplies readily available and you don't have the same infrastructure in place. So you've got to create a combination of factors for the business case in each application. But my view is create a rules framework which indicates that you're supportive of exports and then let business projects come forward and evaluate them on their merits.
Mais vous qui venez
But given that you are from the industry, in fact, you know the business case relating to this. Do we have the infrastructure? Is it ready? Almost ready? How much of an investment is this? Would this require, either on the public or the private side, to achieve what you're proposing here?
I don't know the business case on a case-by-case basis. And, you know, what's fascinating about this, and you can see this in the U.S. in particular, is that new project proposals are coming forward all the time. And why are they coming forward? They're coming forward because entrepreneurs are saying, hey, wait a sec, there's a new technology. I can combine that with this piece of infrastructure over here and this over here, and I can create a new project opportunity. And
combien de temps pour réaliser ces
How long would it take to achieve these goals?
Depend on the regulatory framework. If you expedite that regulatory framework, and to the point made by an earlier by another member, significantly less time. I can't give you months or years, but I will say that right now it's taking years and years, and the world needs it in a shorter period of time.
Pour
A regulatory framework for the industry to be able to export, for us to have the infrastructure to be able to transport. Or, this is your very goal. How long will it take? If the material is there, have the infrastructure in order to transport it.
You'd have to talk to a project proponent. If you want to give me a specific project, I'm happy to go away and talk to the proponents and try to give you a sense of timing. But I'm not. I haven't the means to tell you that there are a dozen projects and this one will take 12 months and this one will take 24. What I can tell you is that with certain conditions in place, you will have much more interest in project development.
est-ce que c'est possible de
Would it be possible to do that immediately, given the demand on the part of our European allies
Immediately?
à court terme?
over the short term?
As I said in my remarks, I think in the near term, there's very little we can do. But in speaking with our European allies, there's an immediate need, which was first the 23 winter, then there's the 24 winter, and then there's the several winters after that. And they're very, very concerned about that. And in conversations I've had with Europeans, they've said, look, yes, we'd love it if there's a lot you could do for next winter, but we're thinking about changing fundamentally a long-term relationship, and we want Canada to be part of the future.
Je pense que
I think my time is up. Thank you. Thank you.
And we now go to Mr. Bergeron. You have 6 minutes, sir.
Merci.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mr. Egan, for being here with us this afternoon. I'm hearing you, and I can't help but quote the Antonio Guterres, the Secretary General of the UN, who said that it was immoral last August. He said these record profits that the industry is collecting in the context of this global energy crisis. He already said that investing in new infrastructure for fossil fuels is morally and economically a folly. Among G20 countries, we're hearing that Canada is in second place of those who are most heavily funding fossil fuels projects with public funds up to 8.5 American US dollars yearly for these types of projects between 2019 and 2021. Mr. Egan, in the current context, given these comments from the Secretary General of the United Nations qualifying this to be a folly, to be immoral, this race for further use of fossil fuels, how to reconcile what you're telling us this afternoon with these warnings that we're hearing from the United Nations Secretary General?
Well, I've just come back from International Gas Union meetings in Peru. I represent Canada in the Global Association for the Industry, and at those meetings there were representatives from several South American countries, including Colombia, Chile, Peru, and others. And overwhelmingly, the comment they made about natural gas development was that the single most effective way to reduce poverty in the developing world is to develop fossil fuel resources like natural gas to make affordable energy available to those who don't have it. That dramatically improves the lives of millions around the world, as it has dramatically improved the lives of millions in places like our country and Europe. At that meeting, there was a representative from the Canadian First Nations community who spoke about the opportunity that natural gas development represents to address economic reconciliation in Canada. To your specific point about the profits of companies, companies are making profits as commodities rise in price. That's always the case. That's what happens in markets. I would also note that every government in this country benefits from those higher commodity prices in the generation of extraordinary revenues for tax purposes, which underwrite a host of public services. And so, on balance, I think the economic opportunity offered by the existence of those companies succeeding is great for all involved.
I think the Secretary General's comments we're aiming at this. Profits are great, work is great, but if it means that eventually there is an end to life itself, is it worth it at the end of the day? And that is the reason why I think he was saying it was folly and immoral. You talk about people who thankfully have jobs through the fossil fuel industry. Okay, but at this point where we get the feeling that fossil fuels as an industry is going away, there is imperial profits that have earned, I think, $1 billion within the first quarter, 3 times more of a profit than the previous year, and the best quarterly profits in 30 years. Mr. Egan, how to reconcile this race for profits in the fossil fuel sector and this statement from the Secretary General from last August saying that it was both immoral, to be in this race in the context of an energy crisis, that it was immoral?
Well, again, the profit of any company, the profit of any sector delivers benefits across society. If you take issue with the idea of profitable economic sectors, then I think there may be more fundamental issues with the functioning of an open market system, because that's what a market system does, and it delivers and distributes enormous benefits across the board. And you can find exceptions where those profits are particularly high at a particular time. And again, invariably, the return in terms of the tax-based revenue, the royalties, and so on, is extraordinary. On the point about the morality of the question, I would point to the fact that over the course of the 20th century, the human condition has improved dramatically, and the number of deaths, the number of tragic incidents as a consequence of natural disasters and other disasters has dropped dramatically, and the quality of human life has increased dramatically. And I think that's a direct consequence of our ability to deliver affordable energy to people around the world. And in doing so, I would say to the Secretary General, as I know his staff do, that there are enormous benefits that come from this sector, benefits that have enabled us to do many of the things that the United Nations is doing around the world.
Je suis désolé de vous
Sorry to interrupt, Mr. Egan, but this committee a couple of days ago was focusing on the record flooding in Pakistan over the last few months, which are a direct result of climate change. And the cause of this is, and you know it is, due to the cause of it is the increase in greenhouse gas emissions. And in Canada, a large part of these greenhouse gas emissions are a direct result of the use and consumption of fossil fuels. Whereas there is an unprecedented global energy crisis, does it make sense for fossil fuel companies to be bringing in record profits? To my mind, that's almost indecent in the current context.
Mr. Egan, if you could just reply in less than 15 seconds, please.
Well, sure. What I would say is you can point to any global crisis and we can identify the horrors it represents for the human condition. We can say, what do we do to address those horrors? And those societies that are best able to address those horrors are those societies that have the infrastructure, that have the means to reduce the kind of human suffering you're referencing. And the societies that can do that are the societies that have built that robust infrastructure. And when we do that, we can make a dramatic improvement in the human condition.
Thank you. We now go to Ms. McPherson. You have 6 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you very much for your testimony and for answering our questions and providing your perceptions on these things. Just one thing I wanted to clarify, when we talk about benefiting people in the Global South, I think we all have to acknowledge that resource extraction has not benefited people in the Global South historically, that has in fact been the opposite case. But that's not really what I wanted to ask a question on. I wanted to ask you a bit of a question on some of your experiences with the Chancellor and with our supplying of energy to Germany, because of course, on February 24th, the world changed, and none of us were ready for what ensued. And certainly, the weaponization of energy by Vladimir Putin and his illegal war in Ukraine has had deep impacts around the world. Now, you said that Mr. Scholz, or Chancellor Scholz, had said that we need your gas. Well, I was in Germany last week. I actually met with the Chancellor. I met with Wolfgang Schmidt, who is, of course, the head of the Chancellery, and they made it very clear that while they do want access to natural gas right now to help them, not in 2023, because they were quite clear that in 2023 they are fine right now, that they did want to have access to natural gas going forward, but they want it for the short term because they have a very strong vision of dealing with the climate crisis. So as they are building their transition hubs, as they are building things within Hamburg to deal with natural gas, they are ensuring all of those pieces are equipped or will be able to be equipped for hydrogen, because they are not prepared to go into 10, 12, 15, 20-year contracts on natural gas. They were interested in short-term natural gas and then a very quick pivot and move as soon as possible to renewables. That was made very, very clear to us. So when we talk about the idea that right now we don't have the capacity to give natural gas to Germany, we don't have that infrastructure, and I may agree with you 100% that infrastructure could have been useful, that would have been nice to have. We don't have it. So realistically, are you describing we want your natural gas in a long-term strategy when long-term doesn't appear to be what the world is looking for in terms of natural gas?
So the comment about the German targets is a very good one. So, and if I recall correctly, correct me if I'm wrong, I think the Germans said they would like to be no longer using gas by 2040. I think that's their target year.
And increasingly reducing it every year.
Right, until then, right? So 2040 is 18 years away. So when we talk about long-term contracts in natural gas, we are talking usually 25 and longer-term contracts, and the Germans are saying, so we don't want a 25-year contract, right, to your point. But, you know, as some German colleagues have said to me, there's also a concept of I apologize for my German pronunciation, but a Ringstrasse, the idea of a ring road. And the point being, move gas into the market. And maybe for the next 18 years, the Germans will use that gas. And maybe to your point, the Germans will use a declining amount of that gas over the next 18 years. But if you look at any forecasts, including UN forecasts, including IEA forecasts, you see that the world is going to be using gas well into this century, well beyond that target that the Germans have set for themselves. So the many other countries that will still be using gas, and Canada should be, as many have said, you know, the last molecule. Our gas could be meeting that global need. Moreover, our gas is already performing better than much of the supply that's out there, so it could make a significant environmental contribution. Now, the other point I'd make about hydrogen is that you know, that you can make hydrogen from a variety of sources, and as this government has noted, the color shouldn't matter at this point. What we should be about is making hydrogen, and so if we're making hydrogen in probably the most likely way around much of the world, it will be made from natural gas. So why wouldn't Canadian natural gas be the source for that German hydrogen? Why wouldn't Canadian natural gas be the source for hydrogen in many other markets of the world? So my point is just, again, why wouldn't we see, as we have done with a host of our resources over the course of our history, that we produce those resources in an extraordinarily efficient way, in an environmentally preferable way, in an affordable way? Why wouldn't we trying to get those to the global market to help the world?
Well, and certainly one would also be able to argue that why wouldn't we want to be pushing for technologies, to advancement in technologies that take more and more liquid natural gas off the market as we develop a greener way of providing energy to people around the world. There's also, of course, that. And while I will say that I think we need to be open to all colors, the turquoise, the gray, the blue, the green, whatever color that is, that I think we can very clearly say green hydrogen is the preferred hydrogen for Germany, for all of us, because it is better for our climate change targets and our goals. The other thing I wanted to ask you about, though, like, you know, I'm not an energy expert. I'm from Alberta, so maybe I should be, but I'm not an energy expert. And so when we talk about infrastructure and regulatory frameworks. We are talking about building a pipeline to go across the country. So that's what that means. And so then when you say that we are going to expedite that, or it should be expedited, what you're saying is that we should not listen to provinces and Indigenous groups in the development of that pipeline? Like, what expedites regulatory? What's stopping the regulatory?
Well, of course I wouldn't say we shouldn't listen to provinces and First Nations. And in my experience of late, certainly with respect to First Nations, they've been some of the biggest advocates of resource development.
And I think we always have to be very, very clear to know that there is not one opinion within any group, of course.
Correct. There are hundreds of First Nations across this country, and each has a unique view on these issues. But in my experience over the last year, I've been struck by how many First Nations are stepping forward and saying they want these projects to go forward, in large part because they're now equity holders in these projects. There's a significant economic opportunity for them to improve the well-being of those in their communities, and that's an enormous benefit to them. And they want that benefit, and so they should be given that benefit. And so and in terms of provinces, I think it's obviously province by province. But there are many provinces that are fully prepared to work with the federal government on expediting a regulatory framework in order to build more infrastructure so that we can move product to market. Not all of them, but yours is.
Mine is.
Thank you, Ms. McPherson. We now go into the second round of questioning, and we will commence with Mr. Hoback. Mr. Hoback, you have 3 minutes.
How come?
Because we've gone over, all the members have gone over, actually, in this first particular round. So
I'm getting
I'm
penalized
afraid we
because
get
the Liberals went over their
reduced
time?
for everyone, yes.
Not right. Okay, I'll have to be very quick there, Mr. Egan. I had lots of questions for you. Let's compare the gas going to the Gazprom pipeline compared to the gas that's produced in Canada. What's the ESG, for example, of the companies involved in Gazprom's supplies versus here in Canada?
Well, I have no study to make reference to on that. Obviously, you can access from the IEA and from other sources satellite maps of the world and showing methane emissions around the world. And what's really striking is how low the emissions are in Canada as compared to where they are in other parts of the world, like Russia. So there's one comment on the E. To comment on the S and the G, I don't see a mass movement of young engineers wanting to work in the oil and gas industry from countries like North America to Russia. And perhaps that's some indication on the S and the G.
And then as far as the governance, well, that's kind of self-proclamatory on its own. I guess the point I'm trying to make, there's a reason why Germany is looking at us in the long term and saying, okay, as we look at our industries and their ESG requirements, where do they want to see their supply chain get the supply of products they need for their facilities? Plus the fact that we do have the war in Ukraine, sitting here creating the hardship at this point in time, actually really forcing them to look at the future, where before it was pretty easy, just open the valve and we'll take the gas from Russia. So I guess I'm kind of curious, you talked about the 18 years left. In those 18 years, if we were to displace Russian gas, what does that mean for the environment, the global environment?
Well, it would mean a dramatic decrease in emissions. Straight up. Again, Canadian gas is produced to the highest standards of environmental performance. The corporate governance we have in our country is exceptional. The transparency of the companies is extraordinary, and all of that goes into creating what I think is a better quality product. Moreover, and to come back to the question from your colleague about technology, that I don't know of a sector in Canada that's investing more in technological improvements to further reduce our emissions, to further improve our performance. And there's a reason why we have many across industry in this country talking about how a Canadian molecule is the cleanest molecule. It's because we work to such high standards, and I think we should be proud of those standards.
In that situation, then, if you're a Canadian company, if you're not allowed to get your product to market, even though you've taken all these steps, why would I continue to invest in doing this work in Canada, where I can, at least in the U.S., if I did the same work, I could get it to market?
That's a serious risk to future investment in the sector in Canada.
And what does that mean for First Nations and for investment in small communities all across Canada?
It means less economic opportunity for all of those communities.
Okay. Mr. Epp, did you want to go?
No, I'm afraid they're out of time. Sorry, Mr.
I think you got to watch the clock a little closer. It's not fair.
That's exactly what I'm doing now.
You weren't first round, obviously.
Well, everyone took advantage of it. I do try to the best of my abilities, but when members do go over, this is what happens. So my apologies for that. So next we go to Dr. Fry. Dr. Fry, you have 3 minutes.
Thank you. I just wanted to go back to what both my colleagues, Monsieur Bergeron and Heather McPherson has said. I think we know that Europe is determined to have energy, obviously, for its heating and for its industrial purposes, but it also that's its immediate need. But then it has a medium and long-term strategy, which is what Canada is trying to focus on. And that strategy is obviously, one, to reduce to become carbon neutral, reduce greenhouse gas emissions, and to use hydrogen. I mean, Chancellor Schultz said when he came here that he's looking at Canadian hydrogen. To produce hydrogen, rare minerals that we have here can produce electric cars. So we can look at doing both of those things immediately. Right now, we obviously need the fossil fuel source of gas. So you said there was an enormous benefit for people in the world for affordable fossil fuel. It is that enormous use of fossil fuels around the world that is creating the climate change that we're having now. And I think for me, I wanted you to answer a question. You said that you must build infrastructure because obviously natural gas is the best way to create hydrogen. I would like to ask you, you know that solar energy focusing on water can split into oxygen and hydrogen, which is H2 is hydrogen and oxygen is O2. So the result is steam. I mean, that is what you're doing here to remove greenhouse gas emissions. And we know that microorganisms can produce hydrogen as well. So Canada has an opportunity because you have 20% of the world's water to produce hydrogen. So your argument that we only need to go to fossil fuels and we need to build a huge infrastructure for fossil fuels is only dealing with an immediate need. It is not looking at where Canada and Europe want to go in the long term. And so I wanted to know why you believe that we cannot produce hydrogen without fossil fuels.
Reply in less than 40 seconds, please.
40 seconds. I don't think I said that was the only way to produce hydrogen. It isn't. To the member's point, hydrogen can be produced from electrolysis, and which the electrolysis technology is the technologies the member's referring to, and those are means to produce it, and they're viable means. I think with any technology you use, you have to look at the cost. You have to look at the viability in light of the cost.
I'm sorry, I don't have a lot of time. And I wanted to just focus on one quick thing that I really want you to answer. The question then is, why would we want to build a huge fossil fuel infrastructure when we should be looking at investing in ways to deal with electrolysis and the form of microorganisms to create hydrogen, and let hydrogen be the future? And of course, for electric cars, etc., the rare minerals that Canada has in large amounts.
Considerably over time,
if
I could ask that you get to your question, and Mr. Egan, could you provide a 10-second
I did. I asked him to tell me why we would dismiss those other ways of producing hydrogen.
I didn't dismiss them. In fact, my industry is advocating them and is doing a lot of work on all of them. I would point out that the development of rare earth minerals is a very costly experience and requires a great deal of energy input. And if the energy input is too expensive, you won't develop those rare earth minerals, and that means that you won't ever develop the kind of electric technologies and other technologies the member is referring to. And we all want to develop those things. And so affordability is fundamental to all of this.
Thank you, Mr. Egan. We now go to Mr.
Bergeron.
Mr. Bergeron, you have a minute and a half, Mr. Bergeron. Thank you.
Merci.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Last August, Mr. Egan, you had an interview with the Hill Times and you said that the planet will be consuming far more natural gas over the next few decades, regardless of emissions reductions and targets set. What are you saying, Mr. Egan, that these targets that were defined partly by Canada are basically somewhat meaningless?
What I'm saying is that countries around the world are starved for energy, and the energy they want is natural gas, and they're developing that resource or finding others who are developing that resource and buying it from them. So while Canada can indeed pursue the targets it has and pursue them in a host of ways, and again, my member companies are very active in pursuing those targets in cooperation with government, globally, the reality is that the first priority for millions and millions is getting access to affordable energy. And more natural gas is going to need to be produced and used in the world in order to achieve that end.
Énergie abordable.
Affordable energy, it's really not the case right now. Thank you, Mr. Egan.
Thank you very much, Mr. Bergeron. We now go to Ms. McPherson. You have a minute and a half, Ms. McPherson.
A minute and a half. Well, thank you again for your testimony. When I last asked you some questions, you said that Indigenous groups, you sort of gave the impression that all Indigenous groups are supportive, or that there is a lot of Indigenous groups that are supportive of natural gas projects, and that there are many provinces, including my own of Alberta, that are very supportive of a natural gas pipeline. So what's the problem? Realistically, you're talking about the idea that we have, because we are a massive country with many provinces, many Indigenous peoples that have many opinions. So the reality is that we have to adhere to UNDRIP. We should want to. We have to adhere to provincial jurisdiction. We should want to. There is complexity in building massive infrastructure projects in this country, and we can say that shouldn't be the case, but that is the case. I know that quite well. I come from an oil family. I understand this, but realistically, the facts remain. This is the reality that we have. This is the reality of our situation at the moment. So the potential for us to be able to get natural gas to Germany to help with Germany's immediate problems right now is quite limited. It's quite limited for us to help in 2023. It's quite limited for us to help in 2024, 2025, 2026, and they're hopeful to not need it very much after that. Is that not accurate? And I know that you're talking about the global situation, but we're talking about Germany here. This study was about the impacts of the weaponization of energy.
Well over your time.
My statement, I guess.
Thank you, Mr. Egan. So now we go to Mr. Epp. You have 3 minutes, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My riding is the home of the second largest cluster of greenhouses in the world after the Netherlands, and it consumes a lot of natural gas. Today, fortunately, when gas prices spiked to $14 a gigajoule 15 years ago, went back to bunker C, back to coal, etc., and it's come back to natural gas, the cleanest burning alternative that's available to that sector. Can you talk about natural gas's positioning structurally from a price perspective, looking at long-term investments in infrastructure relative to what could be coming down the road, hydrogen or things like that?
I mean, we don't forecast gas prices. It's a quick pathway to abject failure to try to forecast energy prices. What I will say is that the supply picture is an extraordinary one in Canada and in North America. We often talk about Canada and the United States. We should also know that Mexico sits on enormous gas resources. And as Mexico begins to look at the development of its resources in a more robust way, that also offers enormous environmental and social benefits. But to the specifics of your question, what's going to affect the price going forward? Well, obviously, there's certain things over which we have no control, like Russia's invasion of Ukraine, that can have a dramatic impact on gas markets. Things that we can control are we sending a signal to investors that it's worth investing more in supply in Canada?
Thank you. Mr. Chair, I'm going to cede the remainder of my time to Member Garnett.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mr. Egan, for your excellent testimony today and for your work. I very much appreciate what you've had to share with us, and it underlines just the importance of the work we need to do on energy security. We're now at the conclusion of our study on Gazprom turbines, and in that light, I would like to move a motion that Conservatives have put on notice. The motion is that the committee report to the House that it calls on the Government of Canada to immediately revoke the waiver to Russian sanctions granted for the export of Gazprom turbines. So I'll make a few remarks on that motion, and then look forward to hearing the comments of other members. And again, I want to thank our witness today. We began this study on the government's decision to grant a waiver to Gazprom in the summer, and we did so under the rubric of an emergency meeting. And there was strong support to proceed with that study. We heard very clearly strong arguments against the government's decision to waive sanctions on Russia in this particular case. Concerns were raised, of course, about how waiving sanctions provides an economic benefit to Russia.
Mr. Chair, sorry, point of order. Would it be possible for us to excuse Mr. Egan? So I think our time with him is done, and we should probably allow him to leave if he'd
Yes, and we
like.
did have another member who had a time slot, but regrettably, it does not seem like he will get the opportunity. Our apologies, Mr. Sarai. Yes, Mr. Egan, allow me to thank you on behalf of the entire committee. We're very grateful for your time, and you can leave if you so wish, and we will.
Well, thank you. I'm happy to talk to any of the members afterwards and take questions privately. Should that be a request? But thank you for the opportunity to appear today.
Thank you, Mr. Egan. Yes, Mr. Jennis.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Of course, one of the reasons not to proceed with these sanctions were concerns. One of the reasons to oppose the waiver was concerns about how the economic benefit that comes to Russia anytime you waive sanctions. But also we heard clearly about the message it sends. When you have countries that talk a big game about sanctions, but then find exceptions here and exceptions there, then the accumulation of exceptions leads to what one witness had described as a kind of sanctions Swiss cheese, where there's all sorts of holes and your sanctions regime is no longer effective. So these were some of the powerful arguments made, and we had the opportunity, of course, to hear directly from the Ukrainian ambassador as part of that discussion. Now, we heard three distinct arguments from the government as to why they granted this sanctions waiver. First of all, they talked about how this was going to supposedly help get energy resources to Germany. That's obviously a moot point now, in that the one turbine that was sent back to Europe was never used, and now the pipeline has been out of commission. So we're not seeing these turbines play any role in supplying energy to Germany. The government then said that allowing the sanctions waiver, which was in effect giving Putin exactly what he wanted, was somehow a way of calling Putin's bluff. We didn't particularly buy that argument at the time, but at this point it's again sort of obviously past the moment of that argument, because we've sent one turbine back. It hasn't been used. Any bluff that was or wasn't going to be called has been called, and there's no reason to repair and send back 5 additional turbines. Another argument that was used by the government was the alleged impact on jobs here in Canada, but we heard very clearly, in fact, from Siemens representatives that no jobs in Canada would be negatively affected by this. So we've seen over the course of witness testimony either through witness testimony or through other global events, the dismantling of these arguments in favor of granting the sanctions waiver. So the point remains that if we're going to stand strong behind Ukraine, we should not be granting exemptions to our sanctions. We should not be repairing turbines for Gazprom. I think that's the clear conclusion for me from this study, and based on comments that have been made by others, I'm fairly confident this reflects the majority view on this committee, and I hope we'll be able to therefore send a strong message in support of our friends and allies in Ukraine to oppose this sanctions waiver and call on the government to revoke it. And hopefully we'll see the adoption of this motion, which indeed sends that message. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Jennis. We now go to Mr. Oliphant.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And just, I've had a little bit of time to think about the motion, not a lot of time, and I'm opposed to it for two reasons. The first is on principle, and the second is on the actual substance of the motion. I think there may be a variety of disagreement with respect to the substance, but I want to talk about the principle first, and that is that we are in the midst of a study on the war in Ukraine by Russia, including the Gazprom turbines. We are in the midst of that study, and I do not think it is ever good for a committee to jump to the conclusions before we finish the study. I think that is just good process. I think that is the way we work best as a parliamentary committee. We have a study, we will have a report, and there can be a recommendation in that report with respect to the waiver. I'm very willing to entertain it at that time, but I think that there's a certain amount of grandstanding that is going on with a motion like this that I don't think is necessarily helpful in a parliamentary system, nor do I think it is wise for us to set that kind of a precedent to jump to conclusions before we actually have finished our study. On that regard, we have just spent an hour without any substance related to the topic at hand, which is about the Gazprom turbines. We heard a committee testimony that should have gone to our Natural Resources Committee. That's where it belongs. It was an inappropriate waste of the time of the Foreign Affairs and International Development Committee to spend talking about a very important issue, but it's not our issue, sir. It is not our issue to deal with that. It is the Natural Resources Committee, its responsibility as part of the energy infrastructure of this country to deal with it. It had nothing to do with a turbine or a pipeline or two pipelines in supplying Russia with energy. It was, again, a political maneuver by one of the opposition parties to attract attention to an issue that really deserves time, I will admit it, but not at this committee. This committee is meant to be dealing with our international relations and our international development portfolios that we are responsible and charged with as part of the standing orders that we deal with. So we had an hour. I did not raise the question of relevance of the questioning because the relevance of the witness was absolutely clear and absolutely forthright in his testimony. It had nothing to do with Russia. It had nothing to do with Germany. It had to do, or nothing to do with the Gazprom turbines particularly, but it had to do with a failure of one of the opposition parties to understand the nature of climate change, the nature of the changing economy, and the nature of energy. No questions were raised about the fact that we have nuclear energy in this country, which far outweighs actually the importance. I would suggest to some European countries that they should deal with that. But that's not, again, this committee's responsibility. Those are domestic issues in Germany, and their ability to have energy security is their absolute responsibility. They will seek other forms of energy. Particularly, we know that the Prime Minister and the Chancellor had great discussions with respect to hydrogen, green hydrogen, and I think that is an important discussion. So on the process, I simply disagree. Let's wait till we get our report. Let's get an understanding of the whole complex nature of the situation. Let's get a whole understanding of what is going on, and then we can indeed look at whether or not we want a recommendation with respect to one particular waiver. It's also, I think, facile to attempt to say that somehow the Government of Canada is not supportive of Ukraine with this one waiver. Canada is ranked in the top 5 countries. You know, some of us were able to meet with the Polish speaker recently, a few months ago, who looked at the 5 or 6 countries that are key to supporting Ukraine militarily, economically, with sanctions, with UN resolutions, at the International Criminal Court, at the International Court of Justice. That is what Canada is doing. Canada is well known for doing it. Canada is extremely honored on both our defense spending as well as on our economic measures as well as on our sanctions, which we do in concert with other countries. So let's get the whole report and see whether there is a place for a recommendation to the government with respect to the waiver. That's on the principle. On the content, I would still say that it is rather circular reasoning I'm getting from the Conservatives. I hear that the turbine is of no value, that it is not being used, it is simply superfluous to the whole situation, and I hear somehow that it is hindering Ukraine's ability to fight in a war. It can't be both. The reality is I'm hearing these arguments, which then takes me simply into pure politics, attempting to divide. I think if there's one thing that we've learned from other experiences of war where Canada has been at its best, it is when we actually unite and talk together about how we do things in the best interest of Canada first and of our support for Ukraine. We are engaged in the conflict, the illegal conflict of Russia, its invasion of Ukraine, for several reasons. It offends our sense of international law. It offends our sense of territorial integrity. It offends our sense of our understanding and the world's understanding of the history of Ukraine and the Ukrainian people. And we have stood united, I believe, against Russia's illegal invasion. And we should continue to do that based on the fact that it is wrong. We also stand united about this because Canada has a unique relationship with Ukraine. We are the home to the largest diaspora of Ukrainian people outside of Russia, if that is to be considered. We, not just on absolute numbers and on percentage, so we have an emotional connection. Nobody doesn't care about Ukrainian people or Ukraine as an emerging yet fragile democracy that we have been supporting since its independence. So the second reason we are doing that, which I hope will come out in this report, that we are united about, is because of that deep and abiding people-to-people connection historically for well over a century. The third reason is because we have and sometimes I have to remind people of this when I've been traveling, is that if you look at the globe in one way, Russia seems very far away from Canada. But if you look at the globe from the top, you recognize that we share a maritime border with Russia, and it is a matter of Canadian security to be sure that we are able to watch, manage, and push back on Russian aggression when it comes to anybody's territorial integrity because of Canada's Arctic as well. People live in the Arctic. Resources are in the Arctic. Climate change is affecting the Arctic. The ocean is opening, and we are watching very closely what Russia is doing in Ukraine because we have obviously sovereignty concerns in our Arctic. So that tells me that we need to engage in a different way on this discussion. We need to find ways that don't play politics about it, don't try to divide and conquer. We have to find a way to be a unity government in a situation where we will take advice from the opposition regularly. The Minister of Foreign Affairs is regularly engaged with members of the opposition who have had constructive, important, and positive statements with respect to Ukraine and have been engaged all the way through. The absolutely appropriate for the opposition to push on military weapons that we should be sending to Ukraine. However, we've also seen that they're often out of date with respect to actually whether those weapons are wanted in Ukraine. We look at our allies. We look at NATO and how we are doing what we can. Canada offers transport for weapons constantly doing that. So we are engaged in providing support and care, continuing with the training mission, which began after the invasion of Crimea. We're continuing to provide financial support, sovereign loans, and other supports to ensure the economy continues. That's what we should be talking about. So On the content of the motion, it's circular, it's specious, it is going back and forth to try to prove somehow some nefarious idea that the government is not helping Ukraine to every degree we can, and we are, and we'll continue to do that. But also on the concept of principle, I would be against it because we haven't done our report yet. Let's hear, if we need more evidence, we'll get more evidence, but I think we have a good calendar to get us to a report, despite the fact that we just wasted an hour on a Natural Resources Committee hearing when we should have been doing more important work with respect to this study. So I will be against this motion. As I just, in closing, to repeat, on principle, we've not finished our report yet, and on the substance of the motion, that I think it is wrong and not in the best interest of Canada's international position, Canada's domestic position, as well as our allyship with countries like Germany, but not exclusively Germany, but also with respect to Ukraine. It is still not proven to me that this has affected Ukraine in any negative way whatsoever, while perhaps being able to at least open the door to helping allies that we want to continue to work with and to be with all the step of the way. The very last point would be that every country needs a social license from its voters, from its electorate, from its citizenry, from its residents to engage in these wars. That's what we need, and our European allies constantly need that. And if they have an energy security threat, just as our southern neighbors may have a food security threat, we need to stand with them. So we need to work on energy security, absolutely. We need to work on food security, absolutely, while we push back at Putin's regime to say enough is enough. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Oliphant. We now go to Mr. Jennis.
Oh, sorry, I'll strike for now.
So we then go to Ms. Ben-Dayan. You want to go back?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I did want to speak to the motion brought forward by my colleague. I am very interested in the discussion that we're having, as I'm sure he is well aware. The situation in Ukraine is something that I care about very deeply. I think that we did hear, however, testimony on various occasions very specific to the turbine issue, including with respect to where this turbine currently is now and what it is being used for. I was unable to pull up the transcript exactly, but I'm sure that the clerk and analysts can help us with the testimony that we did hear from witnesses who told us that the turbine is essentially sitting in a room serving no purpose to anyone, including Russia. What I do know is that we need to continue to move forward in order to support the Ukrainians to end this war. Huge advances have been made as recently as a few hours ago, and again today we announced an additional 500 million in support of the Ukrainian war effort and the fight for democracy and freedom. What I do find a bit troubling, and I, of course, understand the position of my colleagues, but I would like to put on the record that the only time that members of Parliament have ever voted to weaken the sanctions regime imposed on Russia by our country is when Conservative members put forward a motion on Opposition Day on June 7th, at the very height of the war, in which they requested that our government eliminate tariffs on fertilizer. At that point, all four members of the Conservative Party that sit on this committee voted in favor of that motion which I found then and find still today extremely problematic. That would be, Mr. Chair, an important waiver of our sanctions regime. It would effectively mean that the Conservative position on sanctions against Russia is that we should weaken them, not strengthen them. And I find it important to mention that here today as my colleagues attempt to take the high road on sanctions following their vote of June 7th, again, at the height of the war. Mr. Chair, I understand that my colleague will speak again, so perhaps I can respond to what he says at a later time during this discussion, but that's all I wanted to say for the moment.
Thank you, Ms. Bendayan. We now go to Mr. Chong.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. First off, on the timing of this motion, it's entirely appropriate, Mr. Chair, to debate this motion at this point. This is our last meeting on this study that has been scheduled. This meeting concerning the Gazprom turbines. And so I think it's entirely appropriate for us to conclude these hearings with the debate and either adoption or rejection of the motion. The Ukraine study is separate from this particular study that brings us here today. And so I think it's entirely appropriate for us to debate this motion and to conclude this particular study on the Gazprom turbines with this motion. Regarding eliminating the tariffs on fertilizer, the member opposite is wrong about her argument. The government applied the tariffs on fertilizer for Canadian farmers retroactively, Mr. Chair, retroactively. So farmers who had contracted nitrogen last fall, before the war had begun in Ukraine on February 24th, were suddenly dinged with a massive tariff, which directly affected their ability to fertilize their crops this spring, and has led to effects on yields for corn, wheat, soybeans, and a range of other crops. And so to suggest that it was inappropriate for us to ask the government to not retroactively apply the tariff on nitrogen fertilizer is wrong. We simply asked that the government not apply the tariff to fertilizer that had been contracted for before the war began on February 24th, an entirely reasonable position. Farmers shouldn't be penalized for making decisions last fall, a year ago, before the war began in Ukraine. And I heard from dozens and dozens of farmers in my riding of Wellington County and Halton Region that were quite upset about this tariff because they had made decisions on crops and on fertilizer use, whether they were going to use nitrogen or other types of fertilizer based on the fact that there was no tariff on it at that time. We support the tariff on fertilizer that was contracted after the war began on February 24th. And I think that's an entirely cogent and consistent position. In fact, I think it's the right position for the government to have taken, but they didn't take our advice clearly, which is why farmers were negatively impacted, as they often are with this government, for decisions they made well before the war began in Ukraine. And by the way, Mr. Chair, we cannot neglect the fact that these farmers are often operating on razor-thin margins. And so it was an unfair retroactive application of a sanction that should never have been retroactively applied prior to the war beginning on February 24th. Regarding the meeting we just had with Mr. Egan from the Canadian Gas Association, it's entirely appropriate for this committee to talk about exporting LNG in the context of the Gazprom decision by the government. At the end of the day, what we are talking about is whether or not we should have any role as a country in replacing the 40% of Russian gas in Western Europe. We clearly believe Canada does have a role to play. In fact, Mr. Chair, I'll put to you that Canada, being a middle-sized power, can impact many of the aspects of this security situation in Europe in a way that a larger superpower like the United States or even larger powers like the United Kingdom or France or Germany can, by virtue of our size. But the one area in which we could have an outsized impact on countering Putin's aggressive war in Ukraine is to cut off the source of funds of some $100 billion that has flowed since February 24th into Russia from the sale and export of oil and gas. That is one area where Canada could cut the knees out from underneath the Putin regime by replacing Russian gas in Western Europe with Canadian natural gas. And by doing that, we will cut off the 30% of the economy, the Russian economy, that is based on oil and gas, large parts of which are exported. And if we do that, we can make an outsized contribution to the NATO alliance and an outsized contribution to the defense of democracies both here and across the Atlantic, which is why this is not simply a natural resources issue for the Natural Resources Committee. This is not simply an economic issue for the Finance Committee. This is a geopolitical issue, a foreign affairs issue for this committee. In fact, we had a visit from a head of government of a NATO ally, of a G7 ally, to this country in August. His number one request was for more Canadian gas, for any Canadian gas. He came away empty-handed. So to suggest this is just a narrow issue that should be restricted to some economic committee is simply false. And in fact, Mr. Chair, if it was simply an economic issue, then why did the Deputy Prime Minister go to Washington, D.C. on October 11th to give a keynote foreign policy speech, a large part of which centered on expediting energy, Canadian energy, for our allies? In fact, many have dubbed it the Freeland Doctrine on foreign policy. And they have also indicated, she also indicated in that speech, that this is a new policy of friendshoring. And I quote a sentence from her speech. She said, quote, "And crucially, we must then be prepared to spend some domestic political capital in the name of economic security for our democratic partners," end quote. That is a foreign policy doctrine of the Deputy Prime Minister of this government that makes it clear that the government sees the export and expediting of natural gas not just as a narrow economic issue, but as an essential geopolitical issue in support of our allies across the Atlantic. And so, Mr. Chair, I hope members of this committee support the motion. It's done in good faith. I'll finish by saying this. The government should immediately revoke the waiver. Nord Stream 1 has been blown up. There's a 50-meter hole in the pipeline. These turbines aren't going to be of any use to anyone. That pipeline is not coming back. It is broken and dead. And so, as a point of principle, the government should acknowledge the mistake it made in granting the waiver in the first place and simply cancel the waiver so that we can get our foreign policy back on track, which is to say we don't support Russian exports of natural gas to Western Europe. We support the exports of Canadian liquefied natural gas to Europe. And adopting this motion will send a clear statement from this committee about its opinion on the matter and hopefully sway the government to do the same. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chong. We have 5 more people on the list currently. However, I did want to inform everyone that we do have a hard stop at 5:30 because we don't get resources past 5:30. So we next go to Mr. Hoback.
Well, thank you, Chair. You know, there's a lot of questions have been asked about why. If they're going to use it, why should we use it? Well, there's a simple answer to that. It sends a signal. It sends a hard signal back to Russia that it doesn't matter what you do, we're not going to supply things to you. It sends a symbol. It's a symbolism going into Europe to say we're supporting you guys, we're supporting Ukraine by making sure that that waiver is revoked. So there's no chance you're ever going to get that turbine. It sends a signal to the company doing the refurbishing that that turbine has no value, so you can take it apart and throw it away or do whatever you want with it, but you can do something with it because you're not going to ship it. That's the symbolism it's going to send. Now, when you looked at the motion, why now? It's been waiting long enough. This motion's been on notice for quite a while. It's nothing new. This has been in the committee notice motion probably for, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, I think now. So there's no surprise here that this was going to come up. In fact, it was talked about before, but then we said, no, let's wait until we have Mr. Egan testify and then do it, which is what has happened here today. So there's no surprise to the Liberal Party or any of the other parties that this was going to come up today. It was clearly laid out in front of people that this would be coming forward. This is actually something that I think that really needs to be done. It's just another example of where we need to step up and do what we say we're going to do and show that we're going to be back our words with action. Now, the parliamentary secretary said in the midst of a study, well, you know what, this study's going on, there's things that are changing, but there's one thing we know is the right thing to do. And you don't need to wait to finish a study to know when you're doing the right thing, and the right thing is revoking this waiver. He says we're grandstanding. Well, again, I addressed that. We're not grandstanding. I asked about Gazprom. And when I asked him about Gazprom and the type of gas going in there, what did he say? He said, environmentally, Canadian gas would displace a much less environmentally friendly gas. He talked about methane being released in the fields in Russia. And what's that having as far as the global environment, the impact there? I asked him about ESG, environmental social governance. You look at the Canadian companies and what they've done in ESG compared to a Russian company. Well, I don't think there is any comparison. And when you look at their allies in Europe, when their companies are looking at our gas and saying, okay, we have to meet what our bankers and our insurance companies and our shareholders want in regards to ESG requirements, we can help meet those requirements and actually fulfill that need, not just in the short term, but in the long term, because we've gone through that process. We put in the regulatory process to do that. And what's really frustrating is when they've done all this work to meet these requirements and then told they can't take advantage of them here in Canada. So what do they have to do? They have to go to Mexico or U.S. to take advantage of all the technology that they've developed here in Canada because this government won't let them actually fulfill the requirement, or fulfill the ability to actually take this technology into the world marketplace. You know, you heard 18 years of gas still going to be used in Germany. And that's just Germany. We're not talking about third world countries that are going to be using gas for maybe another 40 or 50 years. Where would you want to see this gas come from? Where do you want to see the wealth created? Do you want to see the wealth created in Russia, where it actually goes and funds the military machine for further aggression within Europe or in Ukraine? Or do you want it to come back into Canada, go to our healthcare system or schools, a variety of social services that we have here in Canada that we want and dearly feel we require? You know, those are things paid for by allowing projects such as natural gas to move forward. And energy security around the globe, that is one of the bargaining chips that Canada has on the international stage, is energy security. We've got gas, we've got uranium, we've got critical elements. We've got things that the world wants. It's a strong bargaining chip, and it allows us to actually influence our agenda, Canada's agenda, on the global stage. But when you take and tie your people, you know, tie the hands behind your back of the people that are doing this, you're taking away those bargaining tools, those chips. You're actually not allowing Canada to fulfill its maybe destination or requirements within the world. So it sounds kind of silly that a simple motion like this would actually not go through relatively quickly. I think it should have just been bang. Yeah, let's get her done, move on. I don't even understand why we're debating it for another 5 minutes. It's a no-brainer. It should happen. If you're telling me you're going to ship a turbine to Russia next week, to a pipeline that's blown up, really? What do you care? You're not doing that. You know that. So what do you care about the waiver? Just get rid of it. And let's move on to doing something else in this committee. We've eaten up committee time debating something that doesn't need to be debated. I'll leave that there, Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Hova. We now go to Mr. Bergeron.
Oui, Monsieur le Président.
Yes, Mr. Chair. First off, I have to say I'm somewhat uncomfortable because we were supposed to be hearing from another witness, if I'm not mistaken, on S-233. Now, I'm wondering if that is the case. Would it not, if that is the case, be advisable to release our witness, given that the discussion is ongoing on our colleague's motion, Mr. Jennis? As to the motion itself, in response to Mr. Oliphant's comments, which I generally agree with, I would say that it was wise for this committee to address the decision made by the Government of Canada, because that decision put us in an untenable position, on the one hand vis-a-vis Ukrainians, and on the other hand Germans and other Europeans. And as I was saying from the start, it must not have been an easy decision for the government to take, to allow for that turbine to go back to Europe we hoped to have an opportunity to give the government a chance to explain its decision, which is done. And now for quite a while, we believe on the one hand that it is time to put a stop to the study on turbines. And on the other hand, I think this justifies the first. There is no purpose in a debate on this. Why? For a number of reasons. First, because Putin's bluff has been called. We see that clearly whether the turbines are sent back or not. The Kremlin had no intention at all of continuing to supply Germany or any other European country thanks to Nord Stream 1, which the Russians have probably done away with. So the German ambassador herself, when she appeared before this committee, mentioned the possibility of suspending the permit, knowing that Putin's bluff was called, that the turbine has no relevance at this point, and that maintaining the decision, although the government had planned on having a revocable decision, maintaining this decision seems not only unwise, but on some level, it's almost laughable, almost ridiculous. And when we look at things from a credibility standpoint, I think we do have to put an end to our committee's study of the turbines issue. If were it only up to us, then we would have put a stop to this work a while ago. It's really our Conservative colleagues that have asked for us to add more witnesses. But as Mr. Oliphant was saying, those additional hearings have provided nothing more to the debate. The opinions are clear. The reasons leading to the government authorizing the transfer of the turbine to Europe, although it was controversial, seemed justified in the circumstances. No longer is that the case, and it hasn't been the case for a while now. We should have agreed that that was so a while ago, and this is the reason why, despite Mr. Oliphant's reservations and other issues that I'm in agreement with, I think we do need to put a stop or conclude that the government must suspend or revoke the permit and that we should move to something else. And again, I deplore the fact that this debate was extended to such an extent that our witness is still waiting. And I would reiterate, Mr. Chair, this point, because I think you momentarily stepped out when I said that. I would suggest that we thank that witness and call the witness again for a subsequent meeting. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much, Mr. Bergeron. Allow me just before ceding the floor to Mr. Genis to say apologies to the two witnesses for having made themselves available. But the rules and procedures here are when a motion is tabled, it has to be debated. So we're terribly sorry that this has happened. That having been said, I now go to.
So we might good. I'll strike.
You'll strike?
Yeah.
Okay. Perhaps I should also tell the two witnesses, I understand there's one witness online and another witness in the room here today. Yes, you are dismissed. It does not appear, given the number of people who have asked to speak to this motion, that we will have any time left. We only have till 5:30, and there are currently 3 other members on the list. So thank you very much for having made yourself available. Again, our apologies for this, and we're very grateful for your kind appearance here today. We now go back to
Chair,
yes.
Chair,
Dr.
sorry,
Fry?
I don't know if my hand has been up for quite a while.
Yes,
I don't know if you've seen
there's
it.
one person
Okay.
ahead of you, Dr. Fry.
Okay, thanks.
So as
Thank
the
you.
list currently stands, it is Mr. Zuberi, Dr. Fry, and then Ms. Bendayan. Mr. Zuberi, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And this is an important debate and conversation which we're having right now. And I want to thank the witnesses actually for taking their time to be here. I do hope that we'll have them in our next meeting where we can ask some questions and get into their testimony. I was looking very forward to that. And I'm sorry that we'll have to postpone that to next time. I do hope that they come again in person, if possible. I know one's online and another here is in person, but hoping to see them again here in person if possible. But very grateful for them to take the time to be here. And, you know, so much attention has been given to Ukraine. So much of our country's attention has been given to it, the focus, our hearts and minds, and discussions as parliamentarians. So much ink has been spilled in the papers about Ukraine. And we, all of us as a country, clearly support the territorial integrity and the political integrity of Ukraine. Obviously, we take extreme offense with the fact that Russia has betrayed Article 2, subsection 4 of the UN Charter, which speaks directly to territorial integrity and political integrity of states, of nation states. And what is happening is a great affront, which is exactly the reason why we as a country have been fully in solidarity with Ukrainians, why we, with our allies, including the United Kingdom, the US, EU, Australia, and many others, have been checking President Putin and have been ensuring that this aggression comes to a halt. We have done so much already as a country, thankfully, for Ukrainians, the independence of the country, to shore that up and to restore it. As of, we know it, just to remind us here around the table, as of February 22, we have imposed sanctions on the Russian Duma, the State Duma. That was an important act. That was followed up with other successive acts, including on February 24th, where we sanctioned President Putin's inner circle and close contacts. Then on February 25th, we moved against President Putin himself as an individual and sanctioned not only him, but also his chief of staff, that we continued on to his foreign minister, Sergei Lavrov, the ministers of justice, finance, and defense. So we have acted clearly and swiftly. Speaking of swift, we have also seen that Russia is removed from the whole SWIFT system, which did send not only a signal that we are sanctioning individuals, those who are leading this war machine, but also making it hurt so that they cannot profit from this. The country cannot profit from this. So that people respond to this. And thankfully, we know there have been many brave individuals within Russia itself, including key journalists, including civil society actors, protesters, who have come forth and spoken against their own government. This is extremely brave. We know this. It's easy for us in Canada to do this. It's easy for those in Australia, the EU, to do this. But it's extremely difficult for those in Russia to do it, to stand up and to speak to their own government, truth to power. This is something we have to remind ourselves and support those sort of actions. We on March 1st said that we intend to ban Russian-owned ships or Russian-registered ships from entering our waters, our ports, and our internal waters. This is an important move. On March 2nd, we additionally have announced that we would impose restrictions to an additional 10 key individuals from 2 important companies in Russia's energy sector, including Gazprom. Today, at G20 summit in Bali, Indonesia, our Prime Minister, Justin Trudeau, announced that 500 million additional military assistance would be given to Ukraine. This is on top of the 500 million already allocated in Budget 2022 towards military surveillance and communications equipment. We have thus far sanctioned 1,400 individuals and entities. This all in an effort to halt what's happening. All of this that I just mentioned is on top of the 3.4 billion in assistance that we have given to Ukraine. So we are steadfast in our support of Ukraine, and we have done so much already. But I think the key issue here is the motion which reads, I'll read it again, that the committee reports to the House that it calls upon the Government of Canada to immediately revoke the waiver to Russian sanctions granted for the export of Gazprom. And as my colleague, Mr. Oliphant, said, you know, the challenge around this particular motion is that it is putting forth what should be a potential recommendation and putting it forth in terms of a motion from this committee that we vote upon. And the challenge around that is, you know, I'm fairly new here, 3 years. Most have been here since many years before me. And from what I've learned in my 3 years here, is that this type of statement might be very valid, might be where we land as a committee. But the rightful place of it is within a recommendation. And to fast forward that, to fast track that through a motion isn't ideal. It is far from appropriate, I would suggest, although it's within the rules. But I would suggest that it be put forth as a recommendation, and that's where it belongs. So, long story short, we've done so much for Ukraine. We stand by Ukraine. We stood by Ukraine not only in words but also in concrete actions since the beginning. We will continue to do so. And with respect to this particular motion, it's best placed in a potential recommendation. I'll share that I was in Europe just last week, and I went to Belgium and saw so many Remembrance Day ceremonies over there on the night of the 10th and on the 11th of November. And, you know, what I saw and appreciated was how much society over there still remembers conflicts that are of the past 105 years ago till World War II and till today. And we have to be very grateful that we, thankfully, do not have these sorts of problems and challenges here in Canada. And that we have a society where people come from all backgrounds. And we have a beautiful society where people from all backgrounds come together and have built a project. And this is something that we should cherish, that we should guard, and we should actually share with the rest of the world. But I was you know, touched by how much people remember, and also how people remember the presence of Canada and Canadians. I spent the eve of the 10th of November in Passchendaele, where there were approximately 450,000 soldiers that died during World War I 105 years ago, and over 105 years ago, I should say. There, this space over a few kilometers, city that was liberated by Canada. There were, as I mentioned, over 450,000 young souls that died. But one thing I'd like to share with this committee is the affection that the city of Passchendaele has for us as Canadians. And I encourage those who are here watching this, those who are in this committee room, staff and others, when they're there in that region on the 11th, to just go to the city and see the celebrations. But on this motion, I've said what I need to say. Maybe I'll have more to say on it in a bit. But for the moment, I'd like to see this in a recommendation, at least for us to debate, discuss this in a recommendation, as opposed to here. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Zuberi. We now go to Dr. Fry. Dr. Fry, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Chair. I have some empathy with what Mr. Bergeron said, but I also want to agree with Rob Oliphant. We have spent some time doing this study, and we have listened to witnesses. We need to put forward a report and put forward recommendations. To take a motion that actually presumes that it is the major report in many ways and that kicks aside the report doesn't seem to me to be wise, nor is it in keeping with good committee procedure. I think that it should not have happened. At the same time, I know that Mr. Chong talked about the fact that the Ukraine study is separate. It's not. This is about Ukraine. This is about the very complex issue that we're dealing with. This is about the fact that there is no right or wrong, black or white, in terms of how we deal with some of the complex problems of energy needs in Europe right now, and therefore how that butts up against sanctions that we are willing to take. Those are not easy answers. They're not black or white. They're not simple answers. And so we need to have listened to people. We did. And we need to come up with a report that reflects what we heard. Then we can talk about recommendations. And I think I agree with Mr. Zuberi. This motion should not have been made to just suddenly make everything that we have done and the time that we have spent listening to witnesses to actually be time wasted. It presumes that the rest of this committee does not have an opinion, that the rest of this committee did not hear witnesses, and that the rest of this committee doesn't have anything to say in a report. I think that is, for me, a little bit disrespectful of this committee and what we've been doing. It makes our time wasted, so to speak. Now, we've come to the end of the hearings on this. Let us do what committees always do. Let's have our analysts present us with a report. Let them go about listing what we heard from witnesses. Let them put some recommendations forward for us. Let us put some recommendations forward from us. And let us do it the way we always do with a report. I think what, for me, is bothersome about this motion is that it is back to the old. Everyone says, oh, we all agree that Ukraine is important, that Canada stands firmly, that all the political parties stand with it. And then we take these little cheap partisan political tricks and throw them on the table. Why can't we, for once, act with some kind of integrity about the way that these hearings, this discussion of Gazprom went on? What we heard from witnesses, we heard a lot of things. I also agree with Rob Oliphant when he said that, the discussion about how Canada sends energy to Europe is not for this committee. It is for trade and it is for natural resources. It's both domestic and an export issue. It's not our issue. What we want to talk about is how do we stop the money going towards Russia that in fact feeds its war effort? How do we stop that? How do we stand firm on the things that we want to do? Because Canada has been one of the strongest supporters, you've heard everybody saying it, of Ukraine, and we have moved forward. We, in fact, are even talking now of adding sanctions to everyone, those of the people who are responsible for what is happening to Vladimir Kara-Murza. So we're adding things all the time. We're still there. And we should all be moving forward in that direction. The issue about whether the turbine is now moot, The issue about whether the government should have done it when it did was sort of second guessing everything. When people make decisions at certain times, governments and all people, they do it based on the environment in which they're sitting at the time, on what is there, what they see, what are the choices they have to make. And this is exactly what the government did then. Whether or not our report will tell us, as we heard it, that that may be time to move forward, to move on, not to continue with going around with Gazprom, that's another story. But that'll have to wait for us to table a report and to table recommendations. Jumping the gun, second guessing this committee, making this committee seem as if its work is not important, making all the time we wasted listening to witnesses be exactly that, wasted time. I think that for me, and I know that Rob talked about disrespect, I think that's disrespectful of all of us in the room. We're all here on the committee. I think we all care about the issues. I understand the intent behind the motion, but I think that it's too soon for that kind of motion to come forward. I think Mr. Zuberi said this should actually be a recommendation if, as we discuss it and we discuss a report, we can deal with it that way. If we continue to subvert committee process of all parties, coming up with how the processes work, what we do, what a report is, how we have recommendations on a report, then why bother to have committees at all? Why bother to waste the time of witnesses and the time of this committee to actually listen to those witnesses? We have moved forward since this committee began this study. Lots of things have happened. We've heard from a lot of people. And I think we know very clearly that while Europe is in immediate need of energy right now, they have energy for the next year. And the big question then is, what does our Canadian natural resources and Canadian trade do about that? We've heard about that. We've heard about what our Deputy Prime Minister had to say. We have a report to table, and we have recommendations on that report to move forward and to decide that we can subvert this by throwing in some motion at the end of the day, and I might add, by taking away the ability to ask a question from the last questioner, who would have been the Liberal, acting again is disrespectful. I mean, it's clever. It's a clever ploy. We all know that we do that. Everybody goes, oh, I know when I'm going to move my motion so I can stop anybody else from asking questions. Is that what we really are about as a committee? Or are we really, as a committee, looking at finding good answers? Are we, in this instance, when we're talking about an illegal war on a man who is bent on, I don't know, being sociopathic or whatever you want to say about him? That is what we should all be focusing on. What do we do? How do we do? How do we cut the legs out from under Vladimir Putin and his war effort? You know, there are a lot of other countries that can supply immediate resources to Europe. There's Kazakhstan, which is not siding with Russia in this war. We have Norway, we have Scandinavian countries that have oil and gas. There isn't. If what we're really thinking about is just an opportunity for Canada to make hay and for Canada to go out there and set up a new industry of fossil fuels and build infrastructure to do that, that's not what we're meant to be discussing. We're meant to be discussing, can Europe have energy to heat itself and to run its factories over this period of time? And how do we develop a long-term strategy in which Canada can take a part? But that's not for us to discuss. That's for trade and natural resources to discuss. And I think what we need to do is to talk about whether we should continue with the turbine thing, or as many people have said, is it moot? I don't know. Let's have that report tell us what we should be saying and what we should be doing. We know that Germany is interested in Canadian energy. We heard that. We heard that at this committee, but Germany came and met with our Minister of Natural Resources and talked about hydrogen. They talked about low fossil fuels. They talked about bringing down greenhouse gas emissions. So I'm sorry I have the floor and I'm speaking. Unless your point of order is that I do not have the right to speak, well, fine, go ahead.
But I'm not ceding the floor. Dr. Fry, 1 second. Yes, Mr. Genis.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. It's clear we're into a liberal filibuster, which is their right to do. I wanted to just get the advice of the chair with respect to the procedures around what happens at 5:30. I understand that we don't have resources available after 5:30. The rules of committee are also that you need the consent of the committee to adjourn. So my understanding would be if we can't adjourn but we can't continue, then the appropriate thing to do at 5:30 would be to suspend. That's been our practice in the past when we run out of resources, but there isn't a consensus to adjourn, that we would suspend. So I wanted to just clarify that your intention would be to suspend at 5:30, unless there's a motion to adjourn. If there's a majority that wishes to adjourn, so be it. But I think if not, we should suspend at 5:30, given the resource issue.
As I understand it, we can adjourn, but allow me to check.
I would move to adjourn, Mr. Chair. It being 17:28, I would move to adjourn.
Help us from adjourning at 5:30. So that is obviously something we could do. We could also suspend, but both those options are available, Mr. Jones.
Well, I made a motion to adjourn, Mr. Chair.
Oh, you did? Okay,
Not
I
to
did not
suspend.
hear you. Sorry.
Yes, well, I know. My voice is so calm and quiet that no one hears me.
Okay. So this meeting stands adjourned. Oh, she brought a motion to
Not
actually?
debatable.
Okay, sorry. Okay. But that wasn't really
It's
necessary,
not
right?
debatable.
Yes.
It's not debatable.
Recorded division by the clerk, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So the vote is on the motion to adjourn. Madame Bendayan.
Oui.
Dr. Fry.
Yes.
Mr. Oliphant.
Yes.
Mr. Sarai.
Yes.
Mr. Zuberi. Mr. Chong.
No.
Mr. Epp. No. Mr. Jenis.
No.
Mr. Hobach. No. Mr. Bergeron.
Non.
Ms. Ashton.
Yes.
So 6 yeas,
Meeting
5
stands adjourned.
nays.
Thank you.